Travis, we've just been having a discussion on the nature of the extraterrestrials and what an extremely advanced race, how they would behave. And I just wanted him to reveal what he said to us, to the rest of the group. Travis?
Well, I was kind of commenting on, how common it is for people to think that there's some kind of sinister thing going on here, that their reason for not making open contact is because they have bad intentions. But, it's not original with my brother, but he was even quoted as saying, if they wanted to destroy us, they could have done it long ago, and there'd be nothing we could do to stop it. It would be so easy for them to surgically remove just humans if that was their intention, and there's 100 ways they could do that. But they haven't, and I really don't think that, this is just my own personal thinking. I've had, almost 40 years to think about it. I was saying that I believe that it's almost goes hand in hand, that with an extremely advanced technology, that you would have the moral and ethical development would necessarily have to keep pace with that. Because if it didn't, they would destroy themselves. They would have weaponry and all sorts of technology to do so much more damage than we would do. So if they've survived that long, they're probably moral and ethical to go with it. I was also talking about how the skeptics say if this was real, they would just land on the White House lawn and announce their presence, And that didn't work out too good. Back in the 50s, there was UFOs over Washington, D.C., and they scrambled the fighter planes. So the greetings weren't too friendly. But not that they would probably be even vulnerable to any weaponry we had. I was talking with these folks here about how there's another end of the spectrum, that they are actually, with their technology, capable of doing everything they're doing here and remaining completely undetected. If the NSA knows where every camera is or where every cell phone is, certainly a technology 100 million years advanced could easily do everything they're doing here and remain completely cloaked. And they're not doing either one. And so the question was why? It's no accident that it's where it is. If they really intended to remain undetected, they could. So I think what's happening is a gradual conditioning process that's always just short of the kind of absolute proof that would cause widespread panic or destruction. Now, sometimes people at gatherings like this find it hard to understand why there would be that kind of destructive reaction, because we take it in stride, but there's a lot of people who wouldn't go to work tomorrow if that were to happen. And, there'd be all kinds of chaos within financial institutions, political, social, just the basic fabric of life amongst humans would be extremely disrupted. So it's in our best interest that they steer clear. It's, science fiction came up with the idea of the prime directive, that they're not going to interfere with, and it's a logical concept that they would avoid that kind of thing, because they're not going to hand us technology that we would just almost certainly turn around and use to destructive effect. That would be, handing us the gun to shoot ourselves in the head. And so I do think that there's probably certain things they can do that don't violate that. Nudging us in the direction of greater understanding of facts we already know but don't really incorporate into, a better way of relating to each other or better way of functioning here on the earth. But for the most part, they have to avoid that kind of contact because it would be harmful to us. And I'm thinking, well, maybe even our governments are sort of participating in that. Maybe to the extent, to some extent, not just covering up for their own cover-up, but also knowing, how destructive it might be if they did open the files. So I've said, I applaud the whole idea of the disclosure movement. It probably, is helping in the long run to get people ready. And that's the I hope, the higher purpose or outcome of gatherings like this, to push us, the whole society, towards being ready for acknowledging that there's other technologies out there. And we're not ready at all, in so many ways. But we can get ready, and we're making progress in that direction, and that's what I hope to accomplish by coming out and doing this kind of stuff. So we were going to take some more questions. Jennifer Stein has put a lot of work into this, drawing on many sources, and it's been a work of passion for her, and I think it shows in the product, and there was a lot of collaboration from a lot of people, and it's still a work in progress. There's some refinements that are going to be made, and a minor roadblock that will be overcome, but just by taking out the part that the guy, we went ahead and made the film, and then he's all of a sudden saying, however, if you use this, you can never show it publicly. You can never let it be shown in theater or on television, which is just totally absurd. There was one misquote where it was stated that the polygraph is not admissible in court, when it is, and that's going to be redone. But other than that, I really don't have anything negative to say about it. A lot of good material in there. And it was in a competition with a number of other films, so 4 or 5 other films, and it won both classes, the People's Choice Award and what was the other? But 2 of them there at the International UFO Congress. They've all, had their own separate experiences. 2 of the men that were teetotalers became drinkers. And one that wasn't really into drinking all that much got deeper into it as a way of trying to deal with it. But they all had their different ways of interpreting it, and we didn't really stay in touch, or, people say you're friends, but they were my coworkers, but we weren't all friends. There was some serious antagonisms amongst us at the same time. But everybody, had their own set of difficulties dealing with people's reaction to it. Well, I don't like to talk about that kind of stuff, but there were some changes, things that. But who can say whether it was just the incredible experience pressing you to become a different person in order to cope with it, or changes that were made sort of as a side effect of just healing the damage. Well, in the immediate aftermath, I underwent a whole battery of medical tests, and one of those was an EEG. And there was an odd pattern that the technician mentioned in his report. And he didn't know who I was, so he didn't know anything about the experience. It was just, a neuroscientist that was told to look for signs of injury And so that was mentioned in there. So the plan is to go back and repeat another EEG, compare the old one with the new one, and also to take the old report and have a neuroscientist look at it in terms of how does this correlate with someone who, may have had a powerful electric shock or a lightning strike, something like that. I had upper body x-rays and nothing was detected. And I described what the physician noted with the little red spot on my arm. And somebody said, well, take a really powerful magnet and pass it over that area. And I did, and I didn't feel anything. So I really don't think there's any. That would have been in the x-ray too. So I don't think there's any implants. Well, that's interesting, a good question, because people say that there's a high incidence of Rh negative with people that have interactions with him. But I always thought I would be positive. However, my daughter, my youngest daughter, who has definite biological markers, as being my child, she's Rh negative. So I would like to get us both retested because her midwife and my youngest boy's wife, they had the same midwife, and I'm just wondering if they got their samples mixed up or whatever. So it's good to follow up on that. And who knows? Maybe my blood type was changed, from positive to negative. Had a comprehensive blood test. It was totally normal. And it's ironic that the UFO skeptic quoted that as implying that there was nothing unusual, like as if the fact that there was nothing bizarre in my blood was sort of proof that it never happened or something. It's kind of a strange, one of those absence of evidence is evidence of absence kind of fallacies.
Well, I understand that astronauts have changes in their blood.
Oh, really?
And that's why I asked.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
But in that recent movie, Travis, that came out here last couple of months, there's an endorsement from an astronaut, Dr. Edgar Mitchell. Yeah, I was unconscious. So I don't have any memory of that. I don't think they blocked any memory. As a matter of fact, more than unconscious, I was probably clinically dead, The violence of that blast of energy was probably fatal. No. Or toileting. Those questions come up, but I'm sure there was because, with 5 days, and the medical tests suggested that there wasn't starvation, because if there's complete starvation, you'll have the presence of ketones in the urine, and that didn't happen. So, but the hydration thing was a little bit deficient. But I've always been somebody who drinks a lot of water, and they may have just underestimated my requirements. Yeah, I did feel some hunger and thirst, yeah. And there was a weight loss of around like 11 pounds. And that was on the home scale, so we actually brought those scales into the doctor's office and compared them. And they were, the doctor's scales, of course, much more precise. And they, correlated with the doctor's scales. So, and this, from the time I was returned to just 24 hours later, much of that weight loss was recovered. So that was an indication that it was mostly dehydration. Yes, I do think that's what they were attempting to do. It just wasn't successful because of the brain injury due to that blast of energy.
So at that point, you were absolutely terrified and you were just defending yourself.
Yeah.
So then they left, and then the two humanoids
you encountered the human
Well,
ones.
one came in and took me out of there and left me in the company of 3 others who rendered me unconscious again. And I think probably just because I was out of my mind and flailing around and not being cooperative, that they just had to do that in order to complete the healing.
So do you think if you'd been cool, calm and collected in a situation like that, must have been really difficult, but do you think you would have heard more messages from them or more communication?
Well,
or?
I don't know whether they were silent, and I don't know whether they were psychic or telepathic with each other, but I do think that was the case with the smaller creatures. Oh, I would assume very advanced technology, but I probably, this is just speculation, that they were silent and weren't communicating verbally with each other just because I would get some kind of clue, I suppose they could have learned English and to speak it without any accent that I would identify, but yeah, it could have been just a map room. It could have been something like that rather than a control room. But I don't know, whether it was actually moving the ship or just moving the map. I don't know. No, it was just as stable as I felt no sense of movement. And I didn't hear any sounds of machinery or, those strange sounds that we heard from the outside. I didn't hear anything from the inside. Well, the glow was actually from the craft itself, and they changed it to red in the movie for some reason, but it wasn't. It was a soft golden glow. Well, we thought it was a fire, just because it was night, and it was unexpected to see light in the forest at night. Normally we're driving home, and unless it's the headlights of another vehicle, you don't see any lights. Yeah. So we were just guessing what the source of the light was, and it was actually the craft. I didn't overcome it. I just put up with it.
Have you seen or heard anything that makes you think that all of his friends in such a situation, or yourself, would be given better treatment or a better run of things or belief today?
Yeah, I do think that if a similar report were to happen today, that it would be better than it was back then. I think we are reaching a tipping point. I think general acceptance out there in the general public is on the rise at an all-time high.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine then having a dinner like this.
They've done surveys that show that the prevalence of belief is now exceeding 50%. I believe those studies were done in the States, but I think it's growing worldwide because I've been contacted from people worldwide. Like I was telling the others earlier, that just in the last month or so, I've gotten friend requests from Tanzania and a country called Moldova, and really out of the way places. Right before I left for here, I mailed one book order to Hong Kong, and it's everywhere. I think that it takes a while for the truth to trickle out, that it's just gradually, working its way through the alternative medias. And the mainstream media is something that a lot of people don't really trust. They understand that they have a certain agenda. There's certain things they treat certain ways. But the internet is really responsible for a lot of increase in understanding because people trust, independent sources. Although, everybody knows that there's a lot of nonsense on the internet too. They've learned how to sort through it. And I think that's an important part of the increase in acceptance that's going on. And in my case in particular, a lot of the disinformation that was put out has fallen by the way just because people, caught on to what the deceptions were. They didn't show any interest, but I'm certain they had it. There were the government crew that came through the following summer doing magnetic readings on the ground. This was witnessed by a local reporter for the White Mountain Independent. And, those kind of surveys are normally done aerially, but they were doing it in the area, the immediate area, on foot. And so I think that was a follow-up to the magnetic anomalies that were discovered by the UFO group that came in, charted out the group, and found, these high Gauss readings and even the polarity reversal in the direction that the craft had left. So I do think there's been a lot of interest, but it's covert. For them to show up in full military garb and knock on my door and in front of the whole community would be sort of a confirmation of things they don't want to do. So if they were going to make a government inquiry, it would either be, by covert surveillance or maybe sending in someone that was ostensibly a reporter, just doing an in-depth story, but was really asking the questions that they wanted answered. So nothing overt, but probably plenty of covert stuff.
Do you think that the ones on the craft would come and do a checkup and see how you're going on?
Well, it'd be kind of interesting. Wouldn't it be fun to think that, they're looking out for me? But I don't know. Or just, you're on your own now, kid.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, I don't think so. And I hope not, too. Some people think that they can actually track us. They have a way of just knowing us as an individual just by DNA, that there's some kind of a way of sensing the molecules and the way they're combined, that they can track you just by knowing, having a record of who you are to start with. But, that would be some pretty sophisticated technology. No, there's an error on my judgment. I tried to make that really clear. I very unexpectedly got close, jumped up when they were actually trying to move away, and I just, somehow was able to bypass their efforts to have this avoid this having happened. And so, then they were forced to fix my mistake, not theirs. Yeah, there was a big pile of logs here, and I jumped for cover. The nearest cover was forward, but I went into a crouch at the same time. So when I stood up to run away, that brought me closest to the surface of this craft. Now, even the UFO skeptic guy, he wrote a whole paper talking about how when aircraft fly through the air, that the air passing over the hull of the airplane, it builds up charges in the millions of volts. Now, what he was trying to do was trying to explain sightings by pilots by saying that these electrical charges would somehow break off of the craft and fly around them and make people think they were seeing a UFO. And so a lot of physicists and other scientists thought his theory was totally bogus, pretty unscientific. But he did verify the idea that a craft moving at very high speeds through the atmosphere can develop very high voltages in the surface. So that could have been what was happening with this craft that I got too close to, or it could have been, you know, a side effect of the propulsion system that they were firing up to go away, and that, you know, I just got too close to that. Or maybe they were actually conducting some kind of a agricultural experiment on the trees there, and I just got in the crossfire of that.
So you felt the ship was kind of energizing and wobbling, about ready to take off?
Yeah.
So when you woke up, you felt like you had an axe in your head and you felt like your skin was burnt, is that right? Mm-hmm. So that was probably from the voltage, from the anti-gravity.
They had revived me enough to where, you know, if it was like cardiac arrest or something like that, they got that much of it fixed but didn't know how to fix the rest of the damage. So they turned me over to somebody that was probably more familiar with human physiology and maybe had better equipment in that regard to finish the job.
Do you think you actually went up in the anti-gravity beam, or do you think they came down to get you?
I don't know. You know, it could have been.
Were
They could
there
have
other
actually.
witnesses?
Some people think they just teleported me, just dematerialized me, took me somewhere else.
So at what point did your other witnesses leave? They didn't see what happened to you?
No, they
just
didn't
thought
see
that
it.
they
Just
left
as
you
soon
to
as
that?
it hit me and they thought I was killed, that's when they took off.
They took off.
They didn't want to get
And then what time factor was it before they came back to look for you?
They said it was like 5 minutes before they just got a grip, you know, on themselves and turned around and came back. They said they, you know, pretty much almost immediately realized that they were going to have to try to rescue me. Just on the faint hope that I survived that blast.
And then they were possible suspects for your murder, is that right?
That's right.
And so were they held in detention, or what happened?
No, they didn't actually arrest them, but they figured when they went in for those lie detector tests, it was being given in the courthouse, jailhouse, sheriff's office. It was all in one building, and that's where they gave the tests. And they said they figured if anything went wrong with these tests, that they weren't leaving there. They were going straight to jail.
But they all passed.
And they passed. So they were extremely relieved about that, because they had been a lot of murmuring about how they were going to try to just use the tests as an excuse to hang them for murder, just as a way to cover the whole thing up. So they were untrusting. They were thinking that they were going to try to make them look like they had killed me, so that they could have an excuse to arrest them. But
And did they
it was
call
on
in
the
the
up and
FBI
up,
as well?
and
or-
the testing was fair, and they
Yeah.
passed.
Did they call in the FBI on this case?
It makes me wonder if there wasn't some other federal agencies involved. The Sheriff Gillespie was interviewed for Australian 60 Minutes, and he was much more believing in his statements for something that was going to be shown out of the country. And, you know, he comes off as a skeptic whenever he can with American media. But I've gotten emails from his relatives and close friends that say privately he's much more believing. He just doesn't want that known publicly. Plus, you know, him and the other lawmen that were rolled into the James Garner character, you know, he was such a Western icon. You know, he played a sheriff and a hero and so many things that for James Garner to play the part of a skeptic, the local lawmen want to identify with that. But, you know, I'm trying to get through to them that privately James Garner was believing. I mean, you know, outside of the character he was playing, that in real life he steady believed us.
Are you going to do a remake, a feature film?
We're working on it.
So David Wilcox, who's going to be at the Joshua Tree event, he'd be the one to connect with. Because
Well, there's a lot of people who have expressed an interest, and I was approached by a very large production company. They're the ones that made the TV miniseries Game of Thrones. That's the most expensive miniseries in the history of television. And I thought, that's cool. They would have the power to do it right. But when I started saying, I want to tell it how it really happened, and I want to communicate my current understanding on this, they lost interest. They, you know, I could tell. had the idea of making the super horror story, you know, and they
They
said,
want to make it Hollywood style.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Just a moment.
you know,
Could we have a question from the
we might get back with them, but it's just,
Today you mentioned that previously, before the incident, there were animal mutilations around that area.
yeah.
I guess I have two questions. Was there also sightings of UFOs before your incident, and has there been many afterwards?
Yes. Yes to all three of those. And in the Travis film that has been released recently, Sheriff Gillespie acknowledges on camera that they had looked into the Apache County cattle mutilations in connection with this, and that there were reports in the newspapers about that. And what was the other part of the question?
Sorry, and including UFO sightings previously,
Yeah.
before your incident?
And in the sheriff's files, some people reported directly to them that they were camping, hunting, or fishing in that area at that time and saw the craft come over. So, you know, they had that corroboration from those witnesses at that time. And I've had a number of people come to me over the years that saying, yeah, I was out there then and I saw it too. So, as a matter of fact, here, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I got pulled over there by Star Valley, and the officer was acting really nervous, like he thought I was gonna shoot him or something. Do you have a firearm in the vehicle? I've never been asked that question before, and I go, well, yeah. He says, okay, stand right here. And he's acting so scared. The first time in my life I said, all right, you know that movie Fire in the Sky? That's me. And then he relaxed. You know, then he started telling me, you know, I was up in that area and I saw, you know, 3 different things, you know, 3 different sightings. So that, I kind of had an intuitive feeling that he just needed to be reassured that I wasn't some, because, you know, there'd been all this anti-police stuff in the media right then. And so they were feeling unjustly despised in their view in the public mind. Well, not on the craft, but little glimmers of memories that came back. They're just little fragments that don't really tell a story by themselves. So I'm still trying to piece it together, make some sense out of that. Yeah, there's things that I haven't talked about because I've tried to stick to the things that I can document, and otherwise it's just a claim. And to realize some of these things so long after the fact, I don't want people thinking it's some kind of an embellishment, but it's as real as anything, you know, to me. And some of them really freaks people out, even my own family. So it's a good idea not to talk about those things.
Given we're a UFO group,
Yeah.
would you consider that we're all open-minded?
And this is on film.
Wanted to turn it off.
Didn't require a coin. You can pick up the receiver, dial O, and you get the operator. And that was Hollywood. I wasn't naked. They always got to have the nude scene. They had a big nude scene. They had the actor coming up upon this couple in a car getting busy, and they're naked and he's naked, and they start screaming and he starts screaming, and the crew said it was really dreadful, and so they edited that out, and I'm thankful for that. But I guess, you know, the showing the actor as naked in the phone booth is kind of a metaphor for the feeling of scrutiny that I had, you know, people looking into every little thing of my life, you know, and blowing everything out of proportion. I saw no other sign of humans. Now, in the movie, they made like, there was decomposing bodies in there and that kind of stuff, but no, I saw no other sign of other abductees, quote unquote. Oh yeah, they consulted with me. But then when I would say things, saying I wish you don't do it this way or that way, then they just, it was kind of like a pat on the head and run along now. Let the grown-ups do what they're doing here. So they didn't want to listen to me beyond a certain point. And that was true even with Tracy Torme, the screenwriter. He tried to defend his take on things, and he wound up walking off the set. And there were some minor dialogue revisions after he left because they were doing things he didn't like. But they did allow me to come to the set, spend a week up there watching what was going on, but they were not going to entertain my suggestions too much. I actually wrote up a little scene that I would like to have had them included, but that reflected reality. Sheriff Gillespie told the crew that night about his own sighting. And so I wanted to put that into the movie, and so I wrote up how that would fit. And they didn't want that at all. They wanted him as a total skeptic. I wanted to have that scene, which actually occurred before the incident, at least occur at the end of the movie, to where, he sees this light and you see his patrol car go off over there, and it ends with, what happens with him seeing this thing. But I have an interview with Dwayne Smith that I recorded on the phone because he had kind of disappeared. And I had lost touch with him from about the time the movie had come out. I did some interviews with him on the phone. And so couldn't find him. I had a former police officer friend of mine that lived in Oklahoma where I last heard that Dwayne Smith was living. And so he had a friend who was a private detective that tracked Dwayne down. And so I got him on the phone and I said, I'd like to have you come out and talk with me. And he said, yeah, I will. He says, my teeth are looking really bad right now. I don't want to go on camera. But yeah, we'll do that, But Thanksgiving before last, he went to bed and didn't wake up. And so he had a heart attack. So I was very fortunate that I recorded that interview. And finally located that tape recently, and I was going to see if Jennifer wanted to work that into her Travis film. No, the director came to Snowflake and looked around, but it was winter. There were no leaves on the trees, and it just wasn't as pretty as it is in the summer months. And so he didn't want to film there. And there were other reasons. It was just from a practical standpoint easier in the location there in Oregon, where they could just go right up the freeway out of LA and transport all those people, equipment, and everything into an area that they thought looked similar. I have been held accountable, accused of being responsible for the fictionalizations and even for them not filming in Snowflake, but all that was out of my hands, That's not the way it works. Hollywood's not going to put somebody like me in charge of their multi-million-dollar investment. So, even prominent writers, Michael Crichton, Stephen King, always got into major disputes with Hollywood and wound up walking off the set and just throwing up their hands because Hollywood's going to do what they're going to do. So it's not my fault. And I wrote letters. I tried to get them to stick to the real story, and I was almost got myself barred from the set permanently. It was only Joe Wazan who finally arranged for me to come, not Robert Lieberman. Robert Lieberman was the director, but man, that guy had an ego like you would not believe. It was incredible. When we went up to look at the site, there was some snow drifts across the road, and we got stuck in one of them. We didn't get all the way to the site, and so we dug and dug and dug and got everybody that was there was digging the vehicle out. And then when we got done, Robert Lieberman says, well, that's it. We're going to head back. I got us out twice, and I don't want to make it a third time. You know, what, all that digging the rest of us did had nothing to do with us getting unstuck. But that was typical of the kind of stuff that he would say that had people just, you know, wondering about him. I don't know. I guess it was just a job to him, but
So it ends up not being.
he didn't have any history in the subject or anything like that. Well, that would just be my opinion, but you know, the feeling there is that people have sort of, I guess you call it the death of outrage. You know, that that there was a big expose way back 10, 15 years ago when they discovered that certain real prominent journalists were on the CIA payroll, and this was considered a scandalous. A compromise of journalistic integrity. But now it's pretty much assumed that the government is controlling the media to the point where, you know, people have given up on that as a reliable source. You know, the approval rate of Congress is at an all-time low. Well, they fail to mention the approval rate of the media, you know, is really, really low too. People don't trust the media, and they've earned it. That's the reason alternative sources like the internet have become to be more relied on. Back in the day when you had 3 major networks, 3 anchors, Walter Cronkite and the other 2, and he was the most trusted man in America. If he said it, that's the way it was. Now you have all these scandals where, you know, these mainstream journalists, the big anchors, are having been exposed for made-up stories to enhance their careers. But, you know, business as usual. And people are willing to put up with it because they're not even relying on the media anymore. They're relying on other kinds of sources like the internet, which can be just as deceptive. You don't think that the government's going to get in there and create stories or they got it down to a science. They know how to manipulate, you know. They do research about how to do this, and they refine the techniques. They are definitely manipulating the public across the globe.
Well, I believe people are still maintaining their rage on that aspect as well.
On what?
On all the bailouts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's just, you know, so corrupt. It's just beyond belief, you know. But, yeah, it's just, there's just so many things that are just over the top again and again. I think people have outrage fatigue, you know. And it's a sad thing, but, you know, what can you do? Wake people up?
I only read today that they, independent labs and that have just discovered that in Coca-Cola and a lot of the Kellogg's products, that they've got nanoparticles within the food and within the drink.
Really?
They're saying that it goes inside with the chemtrails and all that type of stuff now, and they say, what is that, just a button to press?
Yeah,
And that's proven fact. Like,
they've developed these techniques, you know, and even things like some of these mass shootings, there's a lot of evidence that this is being manipulated. They create this. The CIA has spent millions of dollars developing chemicals that will cause certain psychological reactions. They know what chemical will create a kill frenzy. And there's been movies made about that. And there's evidence that a lot of these shooters were being given prescription drugs that actually caused what they've done.
well, Sandy Hook.
Those kinds of things, yeah.
Yeah.
And with the idea that to disarm the public by just saying, see, we have to get rid of guns, instead of, you know, pointing to the real problem there, that they made these people insane.
That's quite funny there, because Russia now has just turned around and said to their people, go and arm yourself. You're allowed to arm yourself now for protection, which is kind of like a slap in the face to your government,
Yeah.
and a well-deserved one, if you don't mind me saying. Yeah, so that's a good thing, because trying to take the guns off you, because even Russia and China's turned around to your people and said, don't ever give up your guns. The minute you do that, so that's when you're gone.
Because
We're all gone, I suppose.
then they can do what they want. And,
That's
you know,
right.
even if people are our age, what are they going to do about it, you know? And, you know, it's not with the idea that you're going to take up arms against the government and actually do anything. It's just puts teeth in their words, you know? We don't like this anymore, and they know better than to push it beyond a certain point. It's never going to actually happen. It's just a final check on the excesses of government. Absolutely. The antidote to negative is positive. So, you know, you got to just get out there and try to, you know, drop that pebble in the pond and send those ripples out, and it all adds up over time.
This is maybe what we're doing here tonight.
Yeah.
Yes.
In other venues like this. That, as you say, the ripple effect.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder how much of this evil alien stuff is inserted propaganda.
Well,
And a lot of people
exactly.
point to Hollywood and their fixation on the invading monster thing as being controlled media.
Your good friend James Gillen, exactly. That's where he's always on that positive line, and he's always saying keep away from that negative side.
Yeah.
And he's in full contact, as you know.
Mhm.
Who's this?
James Gillen.
Yeah, it's a ranch up in the northwest that where there's a lot of sightings.
Have you been there, Travis?
No, I haven't been there. I do think that they've improved their attitude. There seems to be a little remnants of that. Well, you got to make the little chuckle at the end, make a joke about little green men. But more and more you'll see, you know, them just dispense with that. And I think part of it is they get feedback from people. And people say, you know, stop that. And that's really the best way to change that attitude, is for them to realize that they damage their own credibility doing that. Well, there's a episode with Larry King on there, and Dan Aykroyd's on there, and Stephen Hawking. And Dan's saying, you know, there's all kinds of good, solid evidence, and he kept referring to the Travis Walton case. And so Larry King turns to Stephen Hawking and says, well, what do you think? And he says, oh, I don't think there's anything to this, except perhaps in the case of the state of Arizona. And so I couldn't really figure out whether he was joking or not. He may have been referring to my case, because Dan Aykroyd kept bringing it up, or he may have been just making a joke about the illegal alien border problem coming up from Mexico. So you can go on YouTube and look at it. You decide whether what he was joking about. But it's there's been a shift in the way journalists treat it. They had this famous astronomer. It's no longer Carl Sagan. He's no longer with us. But I can't remember his name. It's a black guy, and he treated it seriously. And he said, "Well, Travis hasn't really provided me absolute proof that it happened," and that's a problem with a lot of the skeptics. they keep acting like failure to prove is itself disproof. And that's not good science. That's not the way science does, you know? You have to prove that something isn't true before you say it isn't true. But they act like if you fail to prove it, that's the same as proving that it didn't happen. And it's not that way at all. And you know, the corollary is in the criminal justice system. You know, you can go into court and have a trial about whether someone committed a particular crime, and they can be found not guilty, but that is not the equivalent of being found innocent. Because not guilty means they just didn't have sufficient evidence to prove guilt. It says nothing about whether you're actually innocent or not. But people just get this confused in their mind. It's not that simple. And you know, so very often if a naysayer is trying to discredit something on television, they'll say something like that, there's no evidence, or there are no studies. And they'll very often say this when there's plenty of studies and plenty of evidence. And that's something that Stanton Friedman is very good at catching them at. They'll say, there are no studies. And he says, oh yeah, how about this, 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 and this, you know? And he can just blow them out of the water. But if you don't hear the other side, and you hear that, you think, oh, well, they made the good case. But the claim that there's no evidence is just really overworked. And very often there's good evidence to the contrary.
Just on that point, if I could do, I had a discussion with a member of the media on radio about the point of proof. And I said, you raised the point of the microwave oven. I said, microwaves have been around since the beginning of the universe, 13.6 billion years. And it wasn't until somebody actually invented some device that measured microwaves that they became provable. Mm-hmm. So, and I said, that's the same thing with UFOs. You know, we can't, if we could invent a device that would prove it, then it would be the same thing. Mm-hmm. But I said, oh, no, that's not the same thing. I said, well, yes, it's exactly the same thing. Microwaves exist, but it took a device to prove it, but we don't have that device to prove it.
It's like we have to keep learning the same lesson over and over and over again. You know, Stan Friedman wrote a book called Science Was Wrong, and it's full of all these examples. And one that he didn't have in there was Lord Kelvin saying that mankind would never be able to travel faster than 60 miles an hour because all the air would be sucked out and you would suffocate and die. So we just can't go any faster than that. And this is a, you know, top scientist of his day. And again, solemn pronouncements from the experts about what's impossible.
Yes.
You know, be careful when you say it's impossible.
Can I ask a question? Recently, Jaime Mason had an event in Mexico about the Mexican alien slides, supposedly, the Kodachrome slides. Did you hear about it?
Yeah, I did.
What did you think of that?
Well, Richard Dolan went online and he had a real rant against the people who came out and were attacking the whole idea without having listened to the testimony of the scientists involved. And I went on there and agreed with him that, you know, to characterize good research, you got to actually look at the evidence first. I said, I'm not making any judgment one way or the other on whether these slides actually represent what they're, you know, reputed to represent. But you certainly do have to look at the testimony of these scientists before you go jumping out there and expressing these hard and fast opinions as if they were fact. So who knows what the case is with those slides, and they probably do have certain problems with the reliability from what I've heard since then. But the idea of jumping out there and, you know, saying it's this, this, and this when they don't know that, they haven't even listened to the analysis from the experts. Yeah, this November 5th, 6th, and 7th, we're having the 40th annual anniversary conference. I've got a number of prominent speakers. Lee Spiegel is the UFO editor at the Huffington Post. He'll be speaking there. David Childress will be speaking on the ancient aliens aspect of it. Lynn Katai will be talking about the Phoenix Lights. Number of other speakers, Ruben Uriarte and Nori Torres, are going to talk about the cowboys and aliens, you know, pre-technology sorts of reports in the American Southwest. And got quite a lineup of speakers and some celebrity guests that haven't confirmed yet, so I won't give their names, but it could be real interesting if their schedules allow them to attend. We'll have a sky watch where we actually go to the site, and I'll go with you. Last time we went at night, and so I think this time we'll just, you know, end it at the time that the incident happened, which is just after sunset, but not total dark. But we will have a sky watch too, but we'll probably have that closer to Heber because people got so cold last time that, you know, we'll have it near the venue, the hall where we'll be speaking, where people can stay warm and comfortable and still. And Ben Hansen will be conducting the Skywatch with some really great equipment. And so it's shaping up to be an exceptional conference, even better than our trial run last November. And I might add, for more information, go to the website that's devoted just to the site, which is skyfiresummit.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.